So, on this episode of The Future of Eye Care, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Tim Trin, CEO and founder of Box Medical Solutions, and also two private practices in Southern California. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Trin. How you doing?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me, Bob.
Sure. So, one of the first things, obviously, would love to talk about your background, where you went to school, when did you know you wanted to get into optometry, and how did that happen?
Man, was a graduate of UC Berkeley School of Optometry. Had two brothers that ended up going there, but for different reasons, they went for engineering. I tried to get in the first time. They didn't let me in the first time, so I had to go again the second time. But optometry was really kind of by accident. It was one of those things where it started off as just a high school research project. And being lazy, I just needed to interview somebody, and I was going to see my optometrist. So I decided, hey, you know what? Why not piggyback that interview? And when I actually got to college at UCLA, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so for 2 years, kind of fumbled around, was undeclared, and then met my future wife, who's said was going to go to pharmacy, and figured I needed to make something of myself. And so went to the career center, decided like, hey, let's give this a shot. And fate happens, and I think everything happens for a reason. Was on the way back from my classes, stopped in an optometry office and just walked in and said, hey, would you be willing to take a part-time hire? And then I'd like, can I volunteer to see what everything's about? And right on the spot, he said, hey, come on board. And from there, just kind of made the pathway, got into it. What I thought I was getting into was totally different from what I actually am doing now. Initially, I was like, this is going to be an easy profession. It's going to be like, spin the dials, one or two. Got into optometry school and really learned that as an optometrist, you can do so much more. And the passion really kind of ignited at that point. And, did a residency in ocular disease, was fascinated by the eye, wanted to go into education, but just because, wasn't able to kind of find a position, moved into LA. Wife is originally from LA, so happy wife, happy life, as the saying goes. And from there, just really kind of started kind of crafting and finding different opportunities, just kind of see what I really enjoyed. And it's been an amazing journey. Wouldn't trade for anything. Would do it again. So
So I saw on your profile that you actually had a biochemistry degree, and I had a biochemistry degree myself. After 4 years of that, the original plan was to go to medical school. So
yeah.
hats off to you for completing that. I'm sure we could talk about your worst memory from biochemistry major. What was the worst class for you?
Worst class was probably my PChem class, where I literally failed it by two standard deviations, and just could not understand the concept the first midterm. And it was probably my greatest achievement too, because failed it, studied my ass off, and was able to kind of ace the final and came out ahead with like an A minus. So from zero to nothing, it was but that was a wake up call, because it's one of those things you can't just kind of like attend class and not put in the legwork. But it was a really interesting class after you did kind of put in the legwork. So
No, it
loved
was
it.
the worst class. So PChem it's a loaded question because it's always PChem.
Yeah.
And best way I think I've had to explain that GPA a couple of times to some recruiters, and they said, describe actually, it was on a recent it was on a job application back during the COVID layoffs, and I think I put on there, it said like, describe your major, and I said, like, imagine reading a foreign language and then insert numbers, or it's just like, it was the absolute worst class ever. It was totally
Yeah,
eligible.
it's basically theory tied in with calculus, tied in with I don't know, and then it's like a totally different language, and you just get thrown in, and you expect to, yeah,
Yeah, it was a tough. So optometry school then was a lot better than compared to PChem.
oh, like optometry school was like a piece of cake compared to
So funny.
compared to PChem. But yeah, it had its different challenges. But I think part of it too is that when you're in college, a lot of the stuff that you're learning isn't really going to be as applicable unless you're really going to be going into, let's say, pharmacy or like biotech, right? And for me, I knew that biochem wasn't my, passion, because when I was in the laboratory, none of the science experiments that I created ever came out right. So, and then so what ended up happening was that, in optometry school, you're going to be dealing with patients. All the stuff that you're learning isn't really just to pass a test. It's really going to be applicable, and you get to see it in the clinic from theory to practicality. And that really kind of changes your perspective on how you approach the profession and how you approach the learning. And it became a lot more exciting because, like, when you see it in real applications, then it's like, wow, like, it makes so much more sense.
No, I totally agree with you. Having passion for anything is ideal. Obviously, my new passion here is on the marketing side. Your story about failing by 2 standard deviations reminds me, I think, of my fourth year biochem class, where I think I got a 28 on a test after the curve. So it's terrible. It's terrible. So, but I tell people I graduated sixth in my class, but there were only six biochemists in my class. So better for us all that I used to sell drugs rather than make them. And that's when in my pharmaceutical days, that used to be my go-to line. But yeah, so now obviously on the medical device and the telehealth thing. So so tell me a little bit then. So you graduated optometry school. So sorry for that segue, but I always think
Yeah,
that's kind of fascinating,
I,
kind of see where people came
I
up and
love
how
it.
they entered the profession. So then you started, so you graduated optometry school. What type of modality of practice were you in right after you graduated?
So right after I graduated, I did a residency. So I was at the VA hospital in Fresno for about a year, and then stayed on board about for another 3 months or so, just as a contractor, prior to moving to Southern California. Moved to Southern California, and that was around 2008. And 2 months into a full-time position at an ophthalmology clinic, Lehman Brothers like went bankrupt, and the financial collapse started. And my schedule went from about 30 patients a day down to about 8 patients a day. And lo and behold, being the new hire, I literally got my termination letter like midway through my day. I wasn't even done seeing patients. And at lunch, they pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you can go home." I was like, "What do you mean by I can go home?" And it was a really humbling moment, because you never would think that as a healthcare professional that you would get laid off or terminated like that. And and they basically said, "Yeah, we don't need your services anymore, and you can go." And I was like, "Can I just finish my day?" And they're like, "No." It's like, and I guess they were worried that I would, take it out on patients or anything else and whatever. But and then from there, ended up working at 35 different office locations within a 2-year span. So I was living in Sherman Oaks at the time, and it's like at the junction between the 101 405 freeway. And I drove pretty much 60 miles in a round circle radius to get any fill-in jobs I could possibly get. So did it with commercial practices, which I thought I was never going to do, because you graduate optometry school, you think you're going to have these ideals, you're going to be a private practice, you're going to do it was a humbling moment for me. And it made me reassess like what it was that optometry was, and balancing what you wanted, but at the same time also making sure you pay the bills. And so I did Target, Costco, Walmart, lens crafters. I did private practices. I did half a dozen private practices, ophthalmology clinics where I just refracted. I did LASIK centers, co-managing, like all those different things, all in a 2-year span. And what it taught me was, you know, how to adapt to different situations, but also gave me insight on what I liked and what I didn't like. And so, and I made it a mission that over those 2 years that, it's, hey, the right opportunity is going to come around. And, I always worked on a business plan with a mindset that one day I was going to open up a practice and be able to kind of implement all those different things I wanted. And lo and behold, finally, one of those, situations kind of panned out. Got a call from an office that I had done a fill-in work with, and they said, "Hey, do you want to, talk about, purchasing or whatever else, right?" And and I, initially prior to that, I had tried to look at several other opportunities. I even put a down payment on a location, 10 grand right after, for leasing out a location. Walked away from it at that time because it just didn't feel right. But when the right opportunity came about, then I was like, you know what? I think this is the right feeling. It's the gut feeling to kind of move forward with it. And 10 years later, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. So it's been amazing.
That's great, with two locations now too, right? You opened a couple second location
Yeah,
a couple years after the.
yeah. Two locations now. So our main location's in Thousand Oaks, and the other one's in Camarillo. But when I started, like literally, like I was told that we had 3,000 active patients. It was really closer to like 200, and it was kind of a clinic that hadn't really been renovated. It was run down, and so put in a lot of money to kind of took out loans, put in money to kind of get it updated. Worked 7 days a week pretty much for my whole first year. Got married that year too as well. Took 3 days for a honeymoon, and like, thank God I have a wife and a partner who's really just amazing and supportive during this whole process. And was able to kind of grow it from that to the two locations that 2 doctors, 3 doctors, 12 staff. It's just been an amazing journey. And I think a lot of it, it's like that hardship and that challenge really kind of made it a lot sweeter. I think if I walked into an opportunity that was easy, like I don't think I would have learned as much, and I don't think it would have been as rewarding. But I don't think I would do it any other way. So
Sure, absolutely. So I think I can remember back to those early days you were describing when you were working in all the different offices. I was a sales rep in that territory. I think you used to
you
confuse me
were,
because I'd find
yeah,
you in like different locations. I couldn't figure out who owned what practice. You were working on different places. And then obviously when you purchased the practice in Thousand Oaks, which is in our, it's in my backyard here.
yeah,
And so something that's kind of a segue to something I always appreciated about calling on you. I always had kind of the next new thing was kind of how I've made my career. And so I always found you to be open to, at least, you had kind of an open door policy, at least you did back then, where you would at least give someone, a rep at the door, 60 seconds or so, and you'd come out, you'd say, what do you got? And if you were interested, you'd take a meeting, you'd sit down. So a lot's kind of changed now. What would be your advice to, with the whole COVID thing, with doctors and sales reps? How are you getting new information? Are you just doing it online? Or if you'd share kind of, how are you extending that kind of that open door, open mind policy that you always had? And are you still, I guess, with
yeah,
how.
yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, it's definitely more challenging now, but I always make it a point to at least like listen to the opportunities and the situations, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and so it's really important to kind of like expand your scope of horizon and your understanding. And that's the only way in business that, one, you're going to know what tools are going to be available for you. For me personally, I'm always actively seeking out ways to kind of continue to improve, because if you don't adapt and you don't change, and especially in the world as it is right now, the profession's changed so much just in 10 years, that you're going to fall behind. And if you fall behind, there's no way to catch up later. So we treat our reps kind of like as our partners in helping us, keeping us informed about what's going on in the world. With COVID and everything, obviously, like the open door walking in policy is a little bit harder to do. But we always encourage them. It's like, hey, just give us a call. We'll set aside that 5-minute time or 10-minute time to do it. And to be honest, like oftentimes it's even more effective, because like you can see the PowerPoint on the Zoom now, right? And you can basically go through things and you can get things out of the way. There isn't any of this kind of lunch aspect that, needs to kind of take up that extra time. And it makes it so much more efficient. And then because then we can actually like, really kind of concentrate on the topic that's at hand, we can ask the valid questions and actually learn a lot more in 10 minutes than it would take an hour over lunch.
Sure.
And so it's it's a different world, but it's still, we try to keep that open door policy.
Sure. So it always kind of amazed me where the offices that had kind of the open door policy were always the most successful. They were always the early adopters, the innovators. And a lot of the practices that, like, they were like, man, we don't have any time for you. You just could not get in to see somebody. A lot of them, when I went to launch the next thing, those offices were gone. They were like a GNC in the parking lot instead of still an optometry practice. So yeah, I always found the early adopters and innovators like yourself always thrived. And there's been so many articles written by doctors about that. So any advice that you'd have aside from that for younger doctors that want to open a new practice because you've done it, and any advice regarding kind of some of the challenges you've posted a lot on LinkedIn about your leadership experiences, your pitfalls, and your lessons. So I always find that personal side of you really fascinating, that you share that openly on LinkedIn. So any kind of tips or advice you'd give new practice owners?
Yeah, I think if you're going to start a practice, you kind of have to do it for the right reasons. There it has to be more than just money. It has to be a certain level of passion. You almost have to have a chip on your shoulder, thinking that whatever you're going to do is going to be better than what's existing right now. Because if you don't, and you go in with a mentality that, hey, I'm just going to open up shop, I'm going to be mediocre, I'm just going to try to get a paycheck. My ultimate goal is to get paid. Um, it's not going to result in one, happiness for you, and two, every time you try to chase the dollar, it's just going to be more and more elusive. You're going to make decisions that aren't really going to be for the right reasons, and your customer base is going to recognize that. Um, and I think if you go in with the mindset that, I want to create, but I want to, and the rest of the success will kind of follow. There's this old, Chinese proverb that's like, you can either chase the money, or you can allow the money to come to you. And that is what we've always kind of held, is that when we started up our practice, like there were days where it's like I literally only had like maybe $500 left in the bank account, but I held true to certain principles and the way I wanted to practice. And through that, we were able to develop the trust, develop the clientele, and that growth went from almost nothing to an exponential growth over the 5-year period. And you have to have faith, and you have to have commitment in your profession, and you also have to be willing to put in the legwork. There's so many people that think that, hey, once I hang up a shingle, that's it. But in this day and age, like, you have to be innovative, you have to be creative. It's not like it was like 30, 40 years ago, you were guaranteed to have people just because of your location. Like, now there's so much research, there's so much consumer elements that kind of come into play. You have to be savvy, and if you're not savvy, you just have to be willing to put in the work to learn it. And you're not going to know all the answers right off the bat when you first start off, and that's perfectly okay. Like, you have to understand that you know as long as you're willing to kind of adapt and continue to explore and experiment, and most importantly, be willing to take risk, that's the most important attribute that you have to be able to have. And if you do that, and you with the mindset that you're growing it for other purposes, and you're going to find that happiness, and you're going to find that success financially as well.
Well, I'm guessing one of those aspects for you is dry eye as well, because this is kind of the segue to. So the practice wasn't enough though, because then you went ahead and started a whole other business. So you care to share the name of the company and what the product is, and
Yeah,
kind of how that came
yeah. So in our whole drive to innovate our practice, dry eye was a big topic around 2015, and that's when it first started. And I was looking for ways to kind of additionally add like opportunities and revenue in the clinic. And I think I had gone to a Vision Source Exchange in 2015 and bought a thermal treatment device, I think called the MiboFlow, right? The other option was pretty much the LipiFlow or LipiView, which was about 100K at that time, which, like, as a starting clinic, that was pretty much half my debt already. There's no way I could afford that. And so, part of it was we needed to kind of create an imaging system to be able to kind of see what treatments would be most beneficial for what patients. And and I really couldn't swallow a $40,000 camera at that time. And so I was having dinner with one of my neighbors, whose husband is actually an engineer. He was a former engineer at Ring Doorbell, and the neighbor is also my former schoolmate. And it just happened over dinner. I pulled out some white paper articles that said, hey, can you create a myography unit, right? And this is what the myography unit is. It's just basically using infrared imaging and XYZ, and we need to kind of determine focal length and all this other stuff. And what started off as an initial kind of project of just like for a hobby and personal use, took a form of its own, and kind of grew. It grew to the point where, like, we posted a few images of our homemade homemade camera system, and we posted on OS Docs, run by Scott Schachter. And the feedback was like, oh my gosh, what imaging system did you take this with? And I was like, oh, we just created it. They're like, and so the feedback was that these images are great, everything looks amazing. So my partner and I said, well, why don't we look at ways that we can commercialize it? And we didn't know what we were doing, like, to be honest. And we're like, well, what kind of risks are involved and all these different things. And I just recently posted one where it's like, we looked at it and it's like, we worried about like, how are we going to deal with the FDA? How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to deal with like patents? How are we going to do all these different things, right? And we just kind of said, you know what, fuck it, right? Just go for it, right? And we created it and we put in money into the company. We started our first batch of production. We were so excited. We had our product and we walked into a doctor's office and we demonstrated it, and then it didn't work. Like, it didn't work properly at all. And but what we learned was the level of like this kind of tenacity and resilience is kind of like this whole theme that we've been kind of going through. And we fixed things and we troubleshooted things and kind of worked it again. And so over like a year span, we refined our product. Then we launched another product, and it kind of led from one thing to another. And now, like about 5 years later, it's like Box Medical Solutions is the name of our company, has been thriving. We're international. We're in Canada. We're here. We're in Korea. We've posted over 250 units with a 2-3 man team, and a large part to like our national consultant too, Todd Hostetter. And it's just been an amazing journey. But just like even starting up from that initial practice, it's just like the level of tenacity that just kind of took us from like fumbling our way around to dealing with all those problems and kind of finding success in it. So it's been pretty cool.
Sure. So, you could have asked me about doing demos in offices. I could have given you about, at that point in time, I was doing device sales for about 6 years, and
Yeah.
could have told you that demos go one of two ways, like, and one of them just isn't good. So I've been on my fair share of show up to do the demo and the machine won't turn on. So for sure, it's something I avoid at all costs. But I know actually that's kind of your core business model, which just goes to show the reliability of your product. And so kind of if a doctor's interested in getting a hold of your product, they can go to your website. And I think like the first thing, you have a great call to action. So like your marketing's really great, where you're saying, do a demo. And so you're pretty much just offering an in-office demo right off the get-go, correct?
Yeah, well, actually, we flipped the whole kind of concept around. Because we don't have a huge sales team, we actually mail the devices to our doctors. And because our whole concept of the device was that we didn't want a large capital equipment that would take up a lot of space either. So we created something small that was portable, that would attach to the current slit lamp. And because of the size and its portability and its integration with existing equipment that you have in your exam room, computer systems, like we're looking to the future, right? And that has allowed us to shift our whole sales model on its head too as well. Instead of like having like boots on the ground, kind of send people out there calling, like we set up an online demo element where doctors kind of qualify and see if this is something that they're interested in by showcasing them the technology through the software. And if it is, then it's just a simple matter of like, hey, they need to take it for a test drive. And especially with COVID, like, we've been doing these virtual demos even pre-COVID. So we were actually one of the first Zoom users, even like about 3 or 4 years ago, because it was out of necessity. So when COVID hit, it was pretty much like, oh, well, nothing's really changing. We're doing everything the same way. But doctors now are actually more inclined to be willing for an in-person, like for a mail demo versus the in-person, service. Prior, doctors were always kind of wary about, like about just receiving equipment. They wanted somebody to come by the office, and now it's just so much easier. So yeah, on our website, we allow doctors to schedule an online demo on www.boxmedicalsolutions.com. We ship them a unit. They get to try it out for basically 30 days. If they like it and it meets their workflow and qualifies and checks all the check boxes that they're looking for, then we basically take a credit card and charge them at that point in time. But yeah, we have a really open policy where we don't even charge you $1 for the shipping or anything at all until you say you're happy, and we take care of all that charges.
That's great. I mean, you've created a really great, like a frictionless sales process. Get it in the hands. It shows how simple and easy the product is to use. I mean, everyone should go check it out. I mean, it's a really elegant looking box. It's a, and so in the medical device side, we call it, selling boxes or so, but it's literally a box, but it's an elegant look. It looks like the cube. It's like a space age device. It's pretty cool,
Yeah,
and the images are amazing. So what's really great about your process, and we've talked about this, you mentioned being adaptable and innovative, and so we've spent some time recently just talking about marketing in the past, and
yeah,
where you're open to different concepts to try to promote your business. So I think you've done a great job with it, but you have a really great experience with the imagery. And so I think that, I mean, the images sell itself, so the quality of what you've done really sells itself. But so as a CEO, though, there's a whole lot of other challenges with
oh
running
yeah.
a business. But something you really talk about on LinkedIn is the people element. That's something that I think really resonates with everyone. Any kind of last tips before we wrap up here? If you have any last tips about kind of what you've learned from managing people, kind of where you started versus some key takeaways you've ended up with that you've posted about recently.
Yeah, like one of the most like difficult elements of running any business is really um, recognizing that you can't do it alone. You require a team, and building that team, setting the right expectations, but also like creating opportunities for the team members is really the most rewarding element that I've personally experienced. Um, I was a horrible leader uh, for over 3, 4, 5 years in my first starting a business. I went through about 35 employees like my first couple of years. And it wasn't because those employees are bad. It was more likely I just didn't know how to lead properly. And we would hire people and throw them into no-win situations where there was no room for success because there was no infrastructure that was set up. Um, and it took the time to really kind of develop myself as a leader. Picked up books that in the past I used to think like these leadership books or self-help books were like whatever, like there's nothing to talk about. Like I used to like think like people that bought into that were like silly. And here I was, like I was reading these things and I was like learning from other business leaders about all the pains that they were going through. And and I think I've read a few of those books prior to even starting the business, but it didn't really resonate until after you felt those pains. And through those struggles and through the asking the questions, reaching out to other people, we were able to kind of develop, like I was able to develop myself to become a better leader, set up the proper infrastructure, set up the systems to kind of help grow it. But one of the things I'd always have to remind myself is that when I am working in all the companies, whatever it is, it's really for our whole team's benefit, right? Like it's not for my own personal gain because I don't really find a whole lot of joy from that. Our family came from nothing. When our family were immigrants, we came to this country with $20 in hand. Pretty much going out to McDonald's was like a treat. And so what I really enjoy is the ability to kind of help raise other people up to their potential. And a lot of our team members, even in our practice, like they dealt with really hardships in their life. And when they had that opportunity, they made life changes, and we've been able to see them grow. And in business, I think there's a social responsibility that you owe to your community and the people that you work with to really be able to give back and help people elevate themselves, because at the end of the day, like when you're on your deathbed, you're not taking your dollars with you, but you're leaving a legacy that's behind. And with that mindset, like you approach business a lot differently. It's all about the people more so than it is about your own financial success. And I think that philosophy carried over from our practice, to Box Medical, and to any future business that we might do. Because when you take care of people, whether it's your customers or whether it's your own team, everybody's going to be more willing to kind of put in the efforts to kind of grow that company, because they know they have a stake in it. And in the past, I would have to micromanage everybody, because I felt like, basically, I couldn't get people to be motivated. And the reason that I couldn't get them to be motivated was because they didn't realize they didn't realize I cared about them, or I wasn't caring about them the way I should have been. And when you start changing your mindset and you take care of your people will take care of you. So that's
Yeah,
what we do.
it's great insights. I'm glad I finally got that out of you. I was trying to pull that out of you for a little while in the interview. So, yeah, I mean, that's the part of your personality that I think really resonates with so many people. How much you do care about people, and how giving of your time you are to people. So I guess kind of, just in summary, you're doing something that's new and innovative as well. Your leadership style is certainly innovative as well. And I would just kind of love to get your final takes kind of on, and anything that you see that you've been involved with, or that you're aware of, kind of that's going to be the future of eye care, and anything that kind of catches your eye. It doesn't have to be anything you or I are currently doing, but something that you can think in terms of what do you think's next for optometry, or just the future of eye care in general. So it could be industry, it could be ophthalmic. If there's anything you're aware of that you're involved in, or heard about.
Well, I think it's really exciting. I mean, there's so much change that's happening in the profession right now. I mean, you look at the tech world, you look at Apple and their approach to, or it was either Apple or Facebook, and wearable technology, eyewear that might be like have like digital screens. You look at myopia control and how that's been taking off. You look at telemedicine. You look at telehealth. You look at dry eye treatments, and it's like the profession as we knew it 10, 15 years ago, like it's not going to be the same 10 years from now. And that's really where a lot of the challenges come, where it's like as a small business owner, if you plan on practicing for another 10, 20 years and really kind of thriving versus just surviving, it's learning how to adapt and integrate technologies to be able to, instead of fighting change, adopting change so that it becomes part of your future plan. And so, even with COVID, like as it happened, we took the time when we shut down to really revamp a lot of our systems. How we do our intake, how we do like remote care, and how we deliver goods, direct shipping versus in-office pickups, and all of these kind of automations and services that you want to were just basically accelerated with the shutdown of COVID. But COVID, if anything, is just kind of like a glimpse of how do you deliver more care more efficiently to patients in the future. And it gives us a sneak peek on like what you need to do to be able to survive the changes that are going to be coming. But I think for optometry, what our bread and butter has been for many years has always been like glasses and contact lenses. And with the changes in vision care plans, the changes in online competition, we're going to see that market shrink a little bit. And with that, like you have to supplement it elsewhere. And I think optometry, where we used to be a general care element, you're going to have to specialize a little bit more, kind of like what ophthalmology has done. Instead of just being general ophthalmology, now it's surgical, or retina, or cataract and LASIK. But instead of fighting the change, you kind of have to embrace it and find ways that you can adopt and then adapt in the future.
Yeah, it's great advice. So you said something previous too about, you picked up some of those professional development books, and it's kind of funny. I was handed a book from a guy right after college. It was the Rich Dad Poor Dad, the original Rich Dad Poor Dad
Yeah.
book with Robert Kiyosaki. And I read that book and I thought to myself, why didn't anyone ever hand this to me like in high school? Like this is the type
Yeah.
of stuff they should be teaching in high school. And I became a professional development freak. Eventually wrote my own book, sales book
Yeah.
around it.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, some of the best leaders that I follow on LinkedIn, Dave Cancel with Drift, for example, has like a reading list for his employees. So I
Yeah.
think you hit the nail on the head on that comment previously about, professional development, really kind of, learn from all these people out there. I think a lot of people don't do it. So the fact that you did it, it just, again, it shows your open-mindedness. You're always open-minded to new technologies and adaptability. So I think that's definitely something that's helped make you, so successful. So I really appreciate you being on this episode of the Future of Eye Care. I think what you're doing is definitely the future of eye care. I'm sure you're going to continue to innovate and bring new products to market. But I appreciate you being on the show, and I look forward to catching up with you again.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Bye.